I'm Rich Andreski, Bureau Chief for Public Transportation at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. And I'd like to welcome you to Along the Lines, a podcast series where we'll explore current issues and ideas on Connecticut's public transportation system. Hello and welcome. This is Rich Andreski here at Connecticut DOT's rail offices in New Haven, Connecticut. Today, we're going to discuss a very relevant and important topic: the role public transportation plays in social justice and equity. When you think of social justice and public transportation, you probably immediately think of civil rights icons like Rosa Parks or the Freedom Riders. But did you know the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VI specifically, continues to play a role in the way we think about and administer resources in public transportation? Everything from design and planning a transit system to how outreach is conducted is guided by that law and influenced by the impact on the local community. As part of the developmental process, Title VI plans are drafted every 3 years to reassess and set standards to ensure fares and services are equitable, and that these changes do not disproportionately burden vulnerable populations. Connecticut DOT and the Federal Transit Administration conduct periodic audits to ensure these Title VI plans are being fully implemented. So today I'm happy to be joined by Doug Holcomb from Greater Bridgeport Transit, also known as GPT. It's one of our largest transit providers serving Connecticut's largest city. And Tiffany Garcia from the Office of Civil Rights at Connecticut DOT. We're going to delve into one of the most important missions of public transportation: equitable access. So Tiffany, maybe you could start us out and talk a little bit about what the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does and how it affects our management and decision-making around public transportation.
Sure. Thank you, Rich. So the part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is Title VI, which requires that any agency, public agency, receiving federal funds does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. They went on to expand that with executive orders that included then environmental justice communities, which includes protections for low-income communities in addition to minority communities, and limited English proficiency populations. So through that, we are required to monitor our services and any changes to our services or fares to ensure that we are providing our services in a way that is equitable to both minority and non-minority communities, as well as low-income populations. And that's extremely important to communities, particularly who are relying on public transportation as their sole resource for access. When you think about someone who's using the bus or the train to get to their place of employment, on-time performance is critical. Additionally, as part of our Title VI requirements, we are required to evaluate any proposed service or fare changes. Through this, we have a policy which commonly referred to as a SAFE policy, which is an acronym for Service and Fare Equity Policy, where we identify various thresholds that determine what constitutes a major service change. Through that process, we are required to conduct outreach to our riders or potential riders to gain some insight into what it is, how these service changes or how these fare changes can impact them, and then take that information and compare it to what our proposal is and then mitigate any potential impacts, disparate impacts or disproportionate burdens to those communities.
Doug, looks like you have something to say on that.
This is a part of transit that most of the world doesn't know is going on. They think we throw a route out there and we roll the dice and see if it's going to work. So the fact that, while it's the right thing to be doing, I don't think the world understands that transit agencies are guarding against intentional or unintentional discrimination in all of the work that they do, how the buses are deployed, what the frequencies are, what the peak loads are. You don't put all your new buses in one neighborhood and all the old buses in another. Those things, I think it's important for people to know that, because that's daily the work that we're doing.
Tiffany, it's been great working with you over the last couple of years. I know you're a big believer in outreach and going to where the people are, right? This is the last time we considered a fare service change was 2018. And I know you were a big proponent of going out to senior centers, community centers, meeting people where they are. So it's really good to work with you on these issues. It's not something I know that we just do out of obligation, but we do a sense of community engagement and in a positive spirit.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. And, to that end, we do have, we have a requirement to conduct hearings, let's say, but we did that extra step, like you said, to go to these community-based organization meetings. We went to neighborhood revitalization zone meetings because it is intimidating for the general public sometimes to walk into a hearing and voice their opinion on something that impacts their daily life. So it was, we noticed that we received a lot more constructive feedback when we were able to go into surroundings where they were comfortable and they were, willing to hear us out and talk.
Great. Yeah. The good old days when we can actually go face to face. So, Doug, I'm wondering if you could share with us some of your thoughts on public engagement and the role. You play a critical role, the state's largest city, a very significant transit system outside of the CT transit system that the state operates. So could you talk a little bit about how you've approached rider engagement and where you see the opportunities going forward?
In terms of community engagement, when I first began in this business, we relied heavily on legal notices, maybe a press release, maybe it gets picked up, maybe it doesn't, maybe a radio broadcast in order to engage the community. And it didn't always go very well. But today we have tools that we didn't have before. We have social media, electronic applications where we can definitely get more public outreach. So at GBT, we don't make a move without community engagement, and it's no longer the one public hearing where you'd have to come to some auditorium. It's usually 5 or 6, any schedule modifications that we make, and we do get a lot of community engagement, all different times of day, different venues. So, and I can't think of a time where we did public outreach and didn't find an improvement to the plans that we had crafted. I mean, a lot of public engagement goes into developing plans, but then when you roll them out and show them to the public, you get feedback. Some of our routes have been redesigned by the public engagement process, so we don't make a move without it.
I'm glad you brought that up because I frequently get asked in interviews, do we listen to customers when we have these hearings? Do we make changes in response to the feedback? Tiffany, I know you have something to share on that.
Yeah, sure. So we recently released a proposed service and fare equity analysis policy, which is part of our Title VI program. And we put it out for public comment. And this year, it was obviously challenging with COVID. We weren't able to go out to the NRZs or to the senior centers to discuss the policy. So we had to do everything virtually. So we posted it online, and we did receive a significant number of comments through which we actually made some modifications to our proposed policy. And it was interesting because one of the common comments was greater outreach. People were looking for greater outreach, and particularly with social media. So that was a frequent suggestion throughout our comments.
Yeah, it's fantastic. What the pandemic has shown us, for better or for worse, is that we can continue to engage with each other. Our ability, years ago, there was a very significant digital divide, and although that digital divide does exist in some respects, I think what we've all learned is that most customers do have access to online forums, and that's often through a cell phone. So smartphones have really changed the game in terms of public outreach. But I want to probe a little deeper on this idea of social justice. So many communities, and often communities of color, low-income communities, are struggling more. They're struggling more for a variety of reasons. They're more impacted by COVID. They hold jobs in many cases that can't be done through telework. Public transportation, what we saw through the ridership data, is that the bus system continued to carry large numbers of riders, even at the height of the pandemic. I'd like to have a conversation. Doug, maybe you're best equipped to answer this. The notion that we can't afford to invest more. How do you respond to those that maybe don't understand the full scope and scale of what we do and the role it plays in the lives of our customers?
Sure. I think before I go into some of the details on my thoughts on that, there's probably people listening that don't know that in Connecticut there's an extensive bus system. There's different systems providing it, but collectively it's a very hardy, very extensive system, and it's providing more than, I think pre-COVID, more than 40 million boardings a year. So that's comparable to all of the boardings on the rail. Half of all the public transportation is being provided by bus, and with geographic coverage that goes well beyond the rail corridors, the big rail corridors in the state. And most transit agencies across the state kept their services, by and large, kept their services all in place. We made some modifications in Bridgeport as the numbers started to drop in early March, but that ridership is coming back, and there's no reason to believe it won't come back to even exceed pre-COVID levels. We're seeing growth already. It's not growing like wildfire, but it's definitely steady and growing. Public transportation has long claimed the environmental benefits of shared rides, the reduced emissions and things. Also, it's long claimed reduce congestion. And these are topics that we use in our legislative activities, right, when we're advocating. But the people in the industry and close to the industry have always known that it's the riders in the communities and making the communities healthier, and not just bringing people from a less affluent neighborhood to jobs elsewhere or in the suburbs, but helping those communities themselves to grow and be more prosperous than they are.
Participating in the economy should not be a privilege. It's a right. The ability to access medical care, employment, educational opportunity. I take that very seriously. Our mission, we have a mission of public service. Where do the opportunities lie going forward in terms of public engagement, and what are we hearing from customers in terms of the forms of that outreach?
Well, we'll continue the community engagement work that we're doing, but this is a really interesting time to be planning and considering the future of public transportation, because before the pandemic, there were all these new models using shared ride networks, even the non-emergency medical networks, trying to find the lowest cost, most appropriate way to move people and expand the service without transit districts or transit agencies necessarily being the ones that provided it. In Connecticut, I think, though, in the future, we have to talk about and focus on and invest in the quality of the services that are there. So some element of the investment needs to ensure that the services that are out there are high quality. And I read recently an article. It was actually an old article from the 90s about transit and social justice, transit as in social justice light. And the writer explained this scenario where he had to give a presentation. So he got in his car and he was going to take the presentation, and he realized he had forgotten his notes. So he turned around and went back home. And then he got back in the car heading to the presentation, and he forgot his ticket to get into it. So he turned around and he went back home. Bus riders can't make those mistakes, right? They have to be at the stop. They have to adhere to the schedule, and they can't leave something behind like that. And so they depend heavily on, as you pointed out, Tiffany, earlier, the quality of the service, right? Can't be ahead of schedule, can't be behind schedule, and we need to make services people can absolutely depend on. Legible, easy to understand, on time, reliable. I'll choose my home location and my work location because I can rely on that transit. And so, all of our riders need that. And that's how we attract more people. So focusing on service span and frequency and making sure that we have the best services out there that people can rely on. I think that if you were to ask at a public meeting, those are the things that people are looking for right now.
Kind of echo what you're saying. I think public transit administrators have this awesome responsibility of really determining where people go and when they go there. So I think it's ongoing engagement. It's not just when there's a potential service change or a fare change. It's frequent and ongoing communication with your riders and to identify what needs are not being met. We don't know what doctor's appointments are being missed because there isn't a bus that serves, them from point A to point B at this time. So it's just really getting to know what the needs are of your riders.
If you are a public transportation user, these aren't abstract issues. These aren't abstract ideas. The idea of accessing essential services, medical care, education, grocery shopping. Think about that. We this notion of food deserts. Many of our urban communities don't have grocery stores within a reasonable distance of people's place of residence. And the only way to get to those grocery stores is through public transportation. Even opportunity, right? Opportunity to participate in the economy or in civic life. We have an election coming up, getting to a polling place. I mean, these are pretty core opportunities or responsibilities that individuals have. And our bus system is absolutely the lifeblood of communities. It's not an overstatement to say that. So, Doug, equitable access to these services. What does that mean in your mind? And where are we succeeding and where are we falling short?
All of these things about social justice and transit and equity, there's a lot of moving parts. Because if you were to say, if the General Assembly were to say, here's $1 million for new service beyond what you're already doing, there's a great discussion that would follow after that. Are we investing in frequency in the services that already exist? Are we extending services to geographic places that we don't cover now? So, and that's the importance of the community engagement. I think the state does a great job, really, in its investment with public transportation. Many states don't kick in like Connecticut does. And so I think all of the communities benefit, whether it's the transportation line item for fixed route operations, or the ADA service for people with disabilities, or even the municipal grants, which goes to every one of the 169 towns for transporting seniors. So we're out there doing all these different things. I think the future is, are there other models for delivering them?
In Connecticut, we are blessed and fortunate to have, first of all, so much support from the governor and the legislature alike. If there's ever debate, it's typically about emphasis and not about funding public transportation, but maybe areas of focus is really what gets debated.
Right, an acknowledgement that these are important services. It seems to be out there, and this is true on the national level, and the debate and the question is, how do we pay for it? What's the mechanism we use to do that? But we get calls from all different constituencies looking for some kind of service, whether it's a special service or a modified route. So we're hearing from people who are advocates, job developers, the workplace we work closely with in Bridgeport. We talk to people who are working in reentry programs for people who were once incarcerated but now reentering the community. We hear from people who manage refugee programs, so people arriving to the United States and services that they need. And so we just hear from, and certainly students, whether it's community college or whether it's high school, we're hearing from all of them. But the solutions vary a little bit, but public transportation benefits all those constituencies.
Yeah, and I'll add to that and say that every dollar invested in public transportation, according to the American Public Transportation Association, generates $4 in economic impact. And if you think about it, the bus operators that provide service, our train crews, our maintenance forces that maintain our fleets, most of them are Connecticut residents. They're paying local taxes, supporting local school districts. They're putting their income back into the economy. The riders that are holding jobs or going to medical care, educational opportunities, there's these secondary and tertiary benefits of a transit system. And so every dollar that's invested is spinning off other benefits other than the fact that we are providing an essential service. I think many of us are now awakened, perhaps more than we were 6 months ago, about just this painful disparity that exists between communities of color and other communities. And just I'm wondering the opportunity that you see in terms of addressing those disparities. The couple that come to mind right now are income and health outcomes. Just wondering your perspective on public transportation and how that can overcome some of those disparities.
Yeah, I mean, I think public transportation plays a key role in combating systemic racism and achieving social justice for communities. Social justice, this idea that, or this belief that everyone should have an equal opportunity to succeed in society. Well, to succeed in society, you need access to healthcare, to employment, to education. And without physical mobility, I mean, you lack access. That's a barrier. And so I think public transportation plays a critical role in eliminating that barrier and moving people out of poverty, and increasing economic growth for not just individuals but also for communities as a whole.
A little story I'll share with you. Like both of you, we like to get out. I like to get out and see the service and ride the service. And a couple years ago, I was standing at State Street Station one morning with the commuter crowd coming off of Shoreline East into downtown. And I saw an individual who was studying the schedule. And I walked over and said, "Can I help you?" And we figured out he was going to Bridgeport and was looking for the through train from Shoreline East to Bridgeport. And it was the last train of the day. There's only two that do that. And the Metro North schedule, the New Haven line schedule, wasn't going to give him the trip he needed to make an interview. He had an interview at Federal Express or UPS, which was in the Bridgeport area, but not easily accessed based on the timing of the train and the buses. And he had that one opportunity to make his interview on time, and he missed it. And I said to him, "Come on, get in the car. I'll drive you there." But here's an example of a single trip in the morning schedule worked for him to get him to that interview on time. And for whatever reason, he missed his trip, and he was going to miss the interview. And then clearly, you miss the interview, you're not gonna get the job. So it's pretty fundamental, right? It's not an abstract idea. It's the ability to actually have gainful employment depends so much on what we do. So many of our listeners are users of public transportation, and many of them are looking for ways to be more engaged and to advocate for investment. What would you say to the allies of public transportation? What are some of the things that they can be doing to bolster support for investment?
So, as well as being in the middle of a pandemic, we are also in the middle of a social justice movement. So I think as you mentioned that the potential for receiving more federal funding. I think what people can do is advocate to ensure that that funding is being distributed equitably. I think it's important for people to get involved, in any way they can, and even proactively, not necessarily when we're reaching out to them, but to follow us, DOT or other associations that support transit, follow them on social media, and to provide feedback even when it's not solicited feedback.
That's great. Yeah, I think hearing from riders all the time, that matters, especially when there's a debate about funding.
It's been my experience in Connecticut that rail riders are more organized and vocal and influential than bus riders. It seems to me that's the case, and there might be lots of reasons for that. And I think it's important for transit agencies to help the bus riders and the people who would be advocates organize and be more vocal, not just during the legislative session or not just during a crisis, but all the time.
Yeah, on that point, I would say that your outreach matters. Your outreach matters greatly. At the Department of Transportation, we routinely get letters from constituents. Often they're addressed to the governor or to the commissioner, and those letters make their way to my office. And every letter is discussed, reviewed. It does influence our thought process and our decision making. When we get comments from the public, either in person or via social media, every one of those comments is reviewed and discussed. And when we see themes, especially a common theme among a cross-section of riders, that does motivate us to rethink how we're doing business. So I would just encourage anyone listening to this podcast who's wondering if their voice counts. Does your opinion matter? Absolutely.
So, yeah, write or call, because I know that I could talk to legislators all day long and testify at the LOB and all of that, but
Legislative office building.
yeah, but 10 constituents write, and that's more influential than I could ever be.
Absolutely. I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Maybe some closing thoughts first on social justice in this conversation.
No, just thank you for having me, and I hope that as we get ready for the upcoming legislative session, that bus riders will organize and advocate for the services. I know I will be doing that. The statewide association will be doing that. The parties that are interested will be doing that, and I hope that we take a view of state investment that is sustainable and not particularly overly dependent on the temporary federal infusion that we've had. We need to come out at the other end with a strong system, not with a hole that is bigger.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, no, I'd like to thank you for inviting me as well. And I think it's just important that we continue these conversations. I think a lot of times the public thinks that we do things to be reactive, and I think it's great that we're doing this and that we continue to move forward with these conversations.
Tiffany, thanks so much for being here with us today as well. I know we all three of us share a spirit of public service. We care very much about what we do and about the customers that we serve. I guess a takeaway for me on this is that the disparities between some of our riders and our non-transit users are great. And although we're counting on many of them to advocate, we also are going to advocate for our riders. We believe in this business. We believe in the role public transportation plays in our state, and the importance of it is in all respects, but ultimately in terms of social justice and the right for everybody to participate in our state economy. So thank you so much for being with us this morning. Great talking with you. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of Along the Lines. This is your host, Rich Andreski. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please remember to subscribe and share.